Hi, everyone. Stephanie had a great question about how, when you have a bunch of ideas for theses, or maybe just multiple, like choosing between one or two, how you choose which thesis you want, um, either for our purposes to submit to me at the end of the semester tomorrow, or to use to write a paper based on, which is what you're going to be encountering when you go on to academic writing in college environments. So, um, there's a few ways to answer that question. One, which Wanda gave last night, which I think is awesome, is the one that interests you the most. And I think that's a great answer. There's also the possibility of choosing the thesis that allows you to write the most organized academic paper based on it. Because as I've told you a bunch of times, the reason Isabel and I are having you do this assignment is in preparation for the kind of academic writing in humanities that you'll do should you go on to major in a humanities subject in college. So a thesis that allows you to write a neatly, well organized, effective academic paper typically has three parts to it, a three-part thesis. So this would look something like, off the top of my head, uh, in You Didn't See Nothing, um, the podcast form is the You Didn't See Nothing is most effective as a podcast rather than any other type of media because it, one, uses background sound effectively to create a world. Two, introduces us to Johannes's strong personality and voice. And three, feels intimate because it's right in an individual's ear. Okay, so it like implicates you in what it's saying. Okay, so again, that's just off the top of my head, but this would work well as an as the um like backbone to an academic paper because each of these things I just listed off can be one separate paragraph, three parts of your argument. So in the first paragraph, I'd say, here's this podcast. We listened to it in class. Here's my argument about it. That this needed to be a podcast because of its use of background noise, which effectively creates a world, the way that it introduces us to Johannes' strong voice, and because it feels intimate, because it's right in our individual ears. Okay. So then I'd be like, so that's my intro paragraph. Then I'd be like, okay, paragraph one. One of the reasons this needed to be a podcast rather than any other type of media is because of its use of background noise. Now that I say that, I'm realizing that I'm stealing Nancy's idea because she pointed out how effective its use of background noise is. But anyway, putting that aside, that it's actually Nancy's idea, which is a brilliant idea, which is why I'm using it. So then I would give so I'd like state that individual part of my thesis as the first part of the first body paragraph. And then I'd say, I'd give some examples of when he uses background noise, like maybe the parade, we hear it, we feel it. Um, and then, so then I'd like, so that's the end of my first body paragraph. Then I say the second part of my argument. Another reason why this had to be a podcast is because we need to hear orally Johann Hans's voice because it's so unique and strong. And then I'd give some example of like how like like maybe the very end of the podcast when he's like, I'm gonna be angry, I'm staying angry. We hear his emotion in his voice. Okay. So then I'd be like, finally, so that's the end of the second body paragraph. Okay, so now I've done two parts of my three-part argument. Then I'm going to do part number three. Finally, this needed to be a podcast because it listening to a podcast is intimate. Like people listen to it on their AirPods, and it feels like private in a way, and we're connecting with Johannes's private story. Um, So that would be my three-part argument. Then I just close it out with a conclusion paragraph, and I could kind of touch on each of the 3 points again, to drive home my argument. So, let me share my screen from last night to give you another example of what this would look like on the page. Here we go. Okay, so I used Emily Dickinson, the argument I have on the academic writing page of the assignment as my example. So, although the poet Emily Dickinson never mentioned the Civil War in her poetry, I argue that she should actually be considered a Civil War poet because her poet engages with themes of, and then here's my three-part thesis. I wouldn't actually put these numbers in the thesis, but it's kind of like stealth. Like I've hidden three separate things in my thesis, and that always leads you to a super organized academic paper. So it's a great thing to practice on this assignment. You do not need to do that, not required at all, but it's certainly something to think about when you're thinking through potential theses, when there's so much to think of arguing about. You want three things, three reasons, three causes, three examples. Some sets of three work really super well in academic writing because most of your academic writing is going to be organized like this. Intro paragraph with the thesis. And that's, I'd say, although the poet Emily Dickinson never mentioned the Civil War in her poetry, I argue that she should actually be considered a Civil War poet. There's my argument, because her poetry engages with themes of, and here's the three. And I'm just going to say for body paragraph one, equality. For body paragraph two, freedom. And then my third item for body paragraph three, violence. All themes that directly relate to the war that was going on in her country as she wrote. So I just want to tell you again, I think I told you this last night, that when I was writing this example thesis, I wasn't even thinking about the three-parter. Like I so naturally did it because I've been doing this for so long. I'm like, yeah, I need three reasons because that's, even though I wasn't planning on writing a paper out about it, I'm very used to making a thesis that has three items in it, three pieces of the argument, because it helps you lay out a paper really neatly. You don't want to be in a situation where you have this beautiful thesis and then you're like, wait, how can I divide this into three separate argument paragraphs? I can't figure out how to. It's like one argument. So here's the second paragraph of the essay and the first, what is called the body paragraph. And the body paragraph is, I'm just going to say, in other words, the paragraph where you make the first part of your argument. Okay, so Dickinson should be considered a Civil War poet because her poetry is often about equality, that item number one from the thesis, a central theme of the Civil War. And then I'd give some examples of talking about equality in her poetry. Then the third paragraph of the paper, which is the second body paragraph, the second argument paragraph. Another reason why Dickinson should be considered a Civil War poet is how deeply she thought about the issue of freedom. Item number two from my thesis, as shown in many of her poems that examine the idea of freedom. And you'll see that I'm not exactly repeating my language from the thesis or from kind of paragraph to paragraph, but I'm showing the reader that there's a parallel. Like I don't want to bore them, but I also don't want to confuse them. Like I want them to show, okay, here's item number two, and then here's item number three. Finally, Dickinson is a Civil War poet because of how often violence occurs in her poetry. So I've got this three-part thesis basically saying there are three reasons why Emily Dickinson could be considered a Civil War poet. She talks about equality, body paragraph number one. She talks about freedom, body paragraph number two. And she talks about violence, body paragraph number three. These are not the only reasons why she could be considered a Civil War poet. There's much more to say, but I'm sticking to three because I don't want to spend my life on this paper. I'm making a neat, organized argument that is going to get me from the beginning intro paragraph through those three body paragraphs to the end, to the conclusion. So a lot of this is about building a neat thesis that is going to allow you to make an effective argument. And as long as I'm at it, I'm going to tell you one more thing that we added to this sheet. And when I send you out this video, I'm going to share this new version of the worksheet that has a few extra writings on it. Okay, this is what we added last night. The frequent problems with thesis statements is that they're way too broad. Like you're making an argument about like media in general or something. Like, if I said, I have this example, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. My example argument about, why You Didn't See Nothing had to be a podcast. I could have said instead, podcasts are the best form of media or the most effective form of media. Not convincing because it's too broad. You're going to be more convincing when you're more narrow. Like You Didn't See Nothing is most effective as a podcast. This specific podcast needed to be a podcast, not like all podcasts are better than like all TV or something like that. It's going to be hard to convince someone of that. So stay in specificity because that's going to help you be more effective as an academic arguer. Okay. As always, if you have any questions, you can reach me over email. You have my email address. Yeah, so I hope this video is helpful and I will see you tomorrow.